Good evening. I'm Nima and this is Forum Daily for Thursday, November 10th. And tonight, Bank of Canada Governor Tiff Macklem says Canada's low unemployment rate is not sustainable and is contributing to high inflation. According to prepared remarks, Mr. Macklem says the country's labor market needs to be rebalanced in order to stabilize decades-high inflation. Mr. Macklem says businesses that are struggling to find workers can't keep up with demand for goods and services in the economy, which fuels higher prices. The governor says a rebound in immigration levels will help businesses grow and will ease inflation. Mr. Macklem added that other policies, such as the expansion of universal childcare, will help increase the proportion of women in the workforce. But he noted that it would take time. However, the governor stressed that these policies are not substitutes for using interest rates to slow demand in the economy and bring inflation down. All right, well, meanwhile, the Parliamentary Budget Officer is out with a new analysis. The Canada Revenue Dividend Tax, a one-time 15% windfall tax, could net the government $4.4 billion. Now this, if it gets extended to include the oil and gas sector, as well as big box stores. The Parliamentary Budget Officer released the new figures, and he says that total would be on top of the $3 billion it is already forecasting could be collected from taxing banks and life insurers. Prime Minister Justin Trudeau is set to miss Friday's National Remembrance Day ceremony in Ottawa. Mr. Trudeau will be out of the country, attending a meeting in Cambodia involving countries from across Southeast Asia. Now, the summit is scheduled to start on Saturday, and it is the first of 4 international meetings. The PM is attending alongside other world leaders, including from the United Kingdom, the United States, and France. Officials at the Chinese embassy in Ottawa are pushing back on earlier comments made by Canada's Foreign Affairs Minister. In a Wednesday morning speech, Mélanie Joly warned businesses against deepening their ties with China. She was suggesting Beijing is increasingly diverging from Canadian values and that it's becoming an increasingly disruptive global power. The embassy indirectly accused Canada of echoing the U.S. in creating division and fomenting confrontation in the region. Candidates running to lead the federal Green Party offered their visions for the party's future and their explanations for its disarray during a debate last night. MP and former leader Elizabeth May is running on a joint ticket with Jonathan Pedneau. Now, she argued that she left the party in excellent shape in 2019 and warned that it is becoming less relevant the longer the party goes without a leader who is in Parliament. Sarah Gabrielle Baron touted the importance of grassroots policy development, and Simone Nakieni-Messier pushed back on reports of constant internal strife. Canada's Chief Public Health Officer says not only has COVID-19 decided it isn't done, but it's getting worse. Dr. Theresa Tam says Canada is also seeing a steep rise in influenza and RSV, which is a combination that is driving the surge in hospitalizations across the country. Now, she says health experts don't really fully understand the dynamics at play with all 3 viruses circulating, so they're urging Canadians to be cautious and use precautions this fall. Tropical storm Nicole has been downgraded from a Category 1 hurricane, making landfall in Florida earlier today. The rare November hurricane has prompted closures and evacuations across the state. As the storm makes its way across the eastern seaboard of the U.S., Environment Canada says Tropical Storm Nicole is set to bring a fall storm over Atlantic Canada. Meteorologist Bob Robichaud says Nicole will bring heavy rain to New Brunswick and major wind gusts to Nova Scotia by Saturday. A recording artist from White Bear First Nations will sing the national anthem at the Grey Cup game in Regina on November 20th. The Canadian Football League says it will welcome Tegan Littlechief to sing O Canada in Cree, English, and French. Ms. Littlechief says she is thrilled and grateful for the opportunity to showcase Indigenous language and culture at the Grey Cup in her home province. Last April, she won the Saskatchewan Country Music Award for Indigenous Artist of the Year. Police in Delta, BC say a truck driver has been penalized after being caught on camera attempting to pass another truck. A 13-second dashcam video shows a transport truck swerving into oncoming traffic on an overpass. Now, this was attempting to pass another truck, and narrowly it avoided a head-on collision. Police say the driver was fined $368 for driving without due care and another $109 for crossing a double solid line. Stay with us. Forum Daily will be right back after the break. And when we return, we're going to take a look at the U.S. midterm elections and how they may impact the markets and investing. Stay with us. Republicans are inching closer to a narrow House majority, while control of the Senate hinges on some tight races. Investors are keeping their eyes on this close election, as control of Congress is likely to impact the markets. The midterm election defied expectations of sweeping conservative victories, which were driven by frustration over inflation and President Joe Biden's leadership. In the House, Republicans are less than a dozen seats away from the 218 needed to take control. Considering how tight these elections are, how would a divided U.S. government affect the markets and, of course, investors? Well, joining us now to give us his take on this is Brendan Caldwell, director of Caldwell Securities Limited. Brendan, welcome back to Forum Daily.
Always great to be here, Nima.
Now, we know you actually just returned from the Big Apple, New York City. What was the overall sentiment there prior to Tuesday's elections?
Well, it was extremely busy there. It's just New York really is back. It's been some time since I'd been there, since before COVID. But if the streets were as quiet during COVID as they were here in Toronto, they are 10 times busier than they are in Toronto. It is packed. It is bustling. So New York is back.
Sounds like the economy is finally starting to come back. Now, how would the results of the U.S. midterms impact the markets, Brendan?
Well, it's a strange thing. This was a very unexpected reaction or unexpected election result. And the reaction of the market has been muted at best. It doesn't seem to care. Now, it's not surprising. Markets, stock markets, markets in general, care less about politics than one might think. It is a bit of a repudiation of politicians' general sense of self-importance. In short, they don't matter as much as they think they do. And the markets don't generally like to be surprised. And this was a surprising reaction, and the market didn't seem to care that much.
Now, that's really interesting to learn. Now, if we're looking at the polling, it seems we're getting closer and closer to a divided government in the U.S. So is that better or worse for the U.S. economy, Brendan?
Probably better. Canada and the Westminster system of government is designed to have someone in charge and for things getting done, and the British sense of fair play to rule over all happens. So even when you have a majority government and the prime minister has considerably more control over what happens than the president of the United States ever does on a day-to-day basis, the Westminster system, the Canadian British system, was designed to have someone in charge. The American system is far more designed to have this constructive chaos, to have nobody really in charge, because I think from the outset, the founding fathers had an innate distrust of government, and so would rather it do little and less. Notwithstanding, it is a funny thing about the American system. We in Canada are never looking for the next prime minister to lead us out of the wilderness, whereas they always seem to be searching for the next Lincoln or the next Washington in the United States, and are always disappointed when he never quite turns up.
All right, Brendan, now, if we bring this back to the impacts on Canada, how do you, or what kind of impact do the U.S. Congress results even have on the Canadian economy in particular?
That's a tough one, Nima, because really, where it's most important is for our prime minister and their president to be on good working terms. Because different than in Canada, where the members of parliament are sort of responsible to their constituents, but not really. Their ability to get elected or re-elected depends far more on the strength of the party and the leader than it does on the loyalty of their constituents. We don't have this concept of primaries. If you are going to be an MP, it's because a federal candidate, it's because the prime minister says you will. Whereas in the US, the Congress, the senators the congressmen in particular, representatives in Congress are far more beholden to their constituents. So long-winded way of saying they don't care what happens in Canada. They don't care about Canada at all. we're having a strong relationship with the president, like, say, Reagan and Mulroney had, like Clinton and Chrétien had. That has done much better for Canada. So to our prime minister, I would say having a strong relationship with the president, whether you like him or not, is part of your job. You need to do this so that your country can benefit. Because the president, while he has no direct power, has a tremendous amount of moral sway. In a divided House, like the one we're seeing or likely to see right now, having the moral sway will be much more useful than trying to get anything done directly with the Senate or with the Congress or with the House.
All right, Brendan, we are out of time, but thank you again for joining us today on Forum Daily. Welcome back. Up now, we have Forum Daily's Market Update with Catherine Murray, host of The Buck Stops Here. All yours, Catherine.
Thanks, Nima. Hello, everyone, and welcome to your weekly market recap. I'm Catherine Murray. Well, what a week it has been. We are seeing markets rally significantly today. The Nasdaq's up by close to 6%, the Dow up by 2.5%, S&P 4%, and the TSX up by over 3% as well. We'll see where the markets end, but nonetheless, a very, very sharp rally today on the back of lower than expected CPI, or lower than expected inflation in the United States, which is really causing investors to believe that the U.S. Federal Reserve might be able to slow down the pace of tightening or raising rates to the point where the expectations are now that perhaps they'll only raise by about 50 basis points in December and have the terminal rate perhaps a little bit lower. So the endpoint from an interest rate perspective might be a little bit lower. That is putting less pressure on those high multiple and reopening stocks. So in other words, you're seeing the biggest rally in tech today, followed by semis and retail stocks, reopening trades also performing very, very well. So bottom line, very much a risk-on day today. Importantly as well, when we think about the midterm elections, which were, of course, the big news this week, but obviously the CPI reading is overshadowing that, many investors and strategists are out pointing out the fact that seasonality is also acting as a bit of a tailwind post-midterm elections. Goldman Sachs says that between now and year end, if you look back over the past 90 years, you'll see returns of about 3%. So in other words, the market continues to move higher. And over 12 months, the returns are about 17%, again, following midterm elections, looking over the past 90 years. So a number of potential tailwinds. At the same time, though, we've, of course, heard continuously from corporate earnings results that that margins are under pressure. Supply chains are certainly still a real factor. Inflation is also acting as a headwind, as is that very, very strong U.S. dollar. So not to ignore those facts that are also, still out there and still presenting a bit of macro uncertainty. But for today, it's very much a risk-on day. As we look at the TSX, as I mentioned, it is up by about 3%. The Canadian dollar is sharply higher versus the U.S. dollar. WTI is up by about 1.2%, and all sectors on the TSX are up strongly. Interestingly as well, though, I would point out that inflation has certainly impacted many Canadians, as we know. Stats Canada is out saying that insolvencies are up by about 22.5% in the third quarter. That's the biggest jump that we've seen in 13 years. We're also seeing corporate results, earnings results here in Canada. Just a couple to highlight. BAM, or Brookfield Asset Management, came in with stronger results, both on the revenue and earnings front, setting that stock up by about 6%. Canadian Tire did come in with disappointing earnings results. Profit was down by about 20%. Costs are higher, and the consumer seems to be retreating a little bit, setting their results again on the disappointing front. Stock down by about 3%. And we're also watching Linamar. Those results came in better than expected, and that stock is up by 8%. Lastly, I just want to point out from a news perspective, again, we had the midterm elections this week, inflation coming in less than expected. I should say on the midterm front, it looks as though it will be a divided Congress, which historically is positive for stocks. That obviously a big news item, but the other big news item, which I'll hit on tomorrow, is what's going on in the crypto world. One of the largest exchanges, FTX, looks to be on the brink of collapse. And their competitor, Binance, has said that they're going to be pulling out of looking to buy that company That has sent a lot of volatility within the crypto space. It's a big, big story this week. We'll see what happens, but I'll address it tomorrow. So those are your three big items this week from a market perspective. Nima, I'll leave it there. Back to you.
All right, thanks for that, Catherine. Again, that was Catherine Murray, host of the Buck Stops Here, which airs on Sundays at 9 a.m. Eastern. Well, it looks like the cryptocurrency prices plunged before rising again today amid U.S. inflation readings. The plunge came after crypto exchange Binance announced that it was pulling out of a deal to purchase failing rival FTX trading. The CEOs of the two exchanges had publicly agreed to a merger on Tuesday, pending due diligence on FTX's balance sheet. Now, that review apparently led to significant concerns for Binance, which then led it to back out of the deal. Meanwhile, the Canadian oil sands industry is scheduled to make a presentation at the COP27 climate conference in Egypt this week. The Pathways Alliance is a consortium of Canada's largest oil sands companies. It is preparing to show just how far the industry has come in terms of its willingness to be a full-fledged partner in the fight against climate change. However, environmentalists have expressed their frustration over the oil and gas sector's presence at the event. We'll be right back. Stay with us. Russia says it has begun withdrawing troops from a strategic Ukrainian city in a potential turning point in the grinding war. Ukrainian officials are skeptical of the retreat. They are warning that Russian landmines could render the municipality a city of death. Kyiv acknowledged Moscow's forces had no choice but to flee Kherson, but remained cautious. A forced pullout from Kherson, the only provincial capital that Moscow has captured, would mark one of Russia's worst setbacks since the war began. Well, as the war in Ukraine continues, the European Union wants to help its armies move faster in times of conflict and boost its cybersecurity. Proposals unveiled on Thursday by the European Commission would identify gaps in European infrastructure for priority upgrades and to ensure that armies have guaranteed access to fuel supplies across the continent. They also aim to ramp up civilian and military cyber cooperation and improve cybersecurity standards and certificates. Moving to Kenya now, where Parliament has approved the deployment of nearly 1,000 troops for a new regional force in eastern Congo. The approval comes amid questions about the $37 million cost for the first 6 months of the mission. A Parliament committee report says the money will be spent on supporting the more than 900 troops joining the East African Community Regional Force, which is supporting Congolese forces against armed groups. Opposition lawmakers questioned why Kenya is spending so much money in the regional mission when the country faces its own security issues. All right, well, meanwhile, the U.S. and Japan have begun a joint military exercise in the Asian country's south. The drill comes as the allies aim to step up readiness in the face of China's increasing assertiveness and North Korea's intensifying missile launches. Dubbed Keen Sword, the drills will include about 26,000 Japanese and 10,000 American troops. More than 24 vessels and 370 aircraft will be fielded. Australia, the UK, and Canada will also join parts of the drills. The number of Americans applying for jobless benefits rose slightly last week. But officials say the labor market remains healthy. As job cuts begin to spread across sectors most affected by soaring interest rates, applications for unemployment claims have gone up. The U.S. government reports that consumer inflation reached 7.7% in October from a year earlier, which is the smallest year-over-year gain since January. All right, staying in the U.S., where Donald Trump is being urged to delay any plans to launch a 2024 U.S. presidential bid. This comes following Republicans' uneven showing in this week's midterm elections. The former president was expecting to ride a red wave to the GOP nomination for another White House run. Now, instead, Tuesday's disappointing results for Republicans are raising questions about Donald Trump's appeal. Some allies say that the party's full focus needs to be on December's runoff election in Georgia, which could again determine control of the Senate. In another setback for women's rights in Afghanistan, a Taliban official says women are banned from using gyms in the country. The Ministry of Virtue and Vice says the ban was being introduced because people were ignoring gender segregation rules and that women were not wearing a hijab. Women are also banned from parks. Since the Taliban overran the country and seized power in August 2021, they have banned girls from middle and high school and restricted women from most jobs. Well, thousands of people rallied in Indonesia today. They are demanding justice and a thorough investigation into those they blame for the stampede at Kanjuruhan Soccer Stadium, which left 135 people dead last month. They were commemorating 40 days since police fired tear gas at a soccer match in Malang City and caused a deadly crush as spectators attempted to flee. The sole reactor of a nuclear power plant in southern Sweden is back online after a brief shutdown. The reactor was shut down after one of the turbines encountered a technical problem. Officials with the plant confirmed that the reactor is working again, but the plant remains disconnected from the country's power grid. A history enthusiast in Newfoundland has discovered what may be the oldest known English coin ever found in Canada. Provincial archaeologist Jamie Brake says he knew he was looking at something very special when Edward Hines sent him photos of a gold coin that he had found this past summer. The 600-year-old coin predates the first documented European contact with North America since the Vikings. But how, when, and why the coin wound up on the island of Newfoundland is still a mystery. All right, I'm Nima Rajan, and that'll do it for your look at national and international news for today. Remember, for more news on demand, you can always visit our website. All right, take care, Canada. We'll see you next time on Forum Daily.